The familiar scent of sawdust and anxiety filled the air of Wilson County Animal Auction House. Early morning sunlight filtered through grimy windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden benches where potential buyers shifted uncomfortably, their bidding cards clutched in sweaty hands. The auctioneer's voice echoed through crackling speakers, a monotonous drone punctuated by the occasional bark or whimper from the kennels lining the walls. In the furthest corner, almost hidden in shadow, sat Max. His German Shepherd ears twitched at every sound, but his amber eyes remained fixed on some distant point, as if looking beyond the confines of his temporary prison. Where most dogs pressed eagerly against their kennel doors, Max maintained a dignified distance, his three-legged stance steady despite the obvious absence of his left front limb. Next up, lot number 47, the auctioneer announced, his usual enthusiasm noticeably dampened. Male German Shepherd, approximately 4 years old. Some physical limitations, as you can see. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Several people pointedly looked away, while others whispered behind raised hands. A mother pulled her young daughter closer, shaking her head when the child pointed at Max with curious eyes. The atmosphere grew thick with discomfort and poorly concealed pity. The shelter volunteer leading Max to the display area had to gently coax him forward. His nails clicked against the concrete floor in an uneven rhythm, yet he held his head high, each step careful and deliberate. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, the scars from his accident were clearly visible, ugly reminders of the hit and run that had cost him his leg 3 months ago. Starting bid at $50, the auctioneer continued, though his eyes had already moved to the next lot number on his sheet. The resignation in his voice suggested he'd seen this scene play out before. Damaged goods were hard to sell, even when they came with 4 legs. 3 made it almost impossible. The silence that followed felt heavier than usual. Even the other dogs seemed to sense the tension, their barking subsiding to anxious whines. Max stood perfectly still in the display area, neither seeking attention nor shrinking from it. There was something in his quiet dignity that made the crowd's rejection feel even more cruel. A young woman in the third row wiped tears from her eyes and hurriedly gathered her belongings, unable to watch what seemed like an inevitable conclusion. Everyone knew what happened to dogs that didn't sell at auction. The already overcrowded shelter could only keep them for so long before making the difficult decision that no one wanted to think about. The auctioneer cleared his throat, preparing to move on. "Do I hear $50? Anyone?" 40, he paused, his gavel hovering expectantly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a purebred German Shepherd. Despite his condition, he's well trained and has a gentle temperament. Perfect for a quiet home." But the crowd had already mentally moved on to lot 48, their eyes straying to the energetic golden retriever puppy bouncing eagerly in the next kennel. In their minds, Max's story was already over, another sad casualty of a world that had little patience for imperfection. What none of them realized was that this moment, this heavy silence filled with judgment and dismissal, was about to become the beginning rather than the end. Sometimes hope arrives in the most unexpected forms, and destiny has a way of turning rejection into the first step of an extraordinary journey. James Martinez hadn't planned on visiting the auction that Saturday morning. His scrub still carried the antiseptic smell of the children's hospital where he'd worked an early shift, and his coffee sat cooling in the cup holder of his beaten-up Honda Civic. But something about the flyer taped to the coffee shop window had stopped him in his tracks, specifically a photo of a 3-legged German Shepherd with eyes that seemed to peer straight into his soul. Standing at the back of the auction house now, James absently rubbed his right knee, a habit he'd developed years ago when his own life had changed forever. The surgical scars were barely visible these days, but the memories remained sharp: the screech of tires, the impact that shattered his teenage dreams of athletic scholarships, and the long months of rehabilitation that had eventually shaped his future. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably another payment reminder from the student loan office. At 24, James was still drowning in debt from physical therapy school, his monthly salary at the children's hospital barely covering his modest apartment rent and loan payments. His mother's voice echoed in his head, gentle but concerned. "Me, Joe, you need to focus on getting yourself established first. You can't save everyone." But that's not why he'd become a physical therapist. Every day he worked with children learning to navigate life with prosthetics or recovering from accidents that had left them different, but not diminished. He saw himself in their struggles, their frustrations, and most importantly, in their triumphs. Each small victory a first step, a recovered movement, a returned smile reminded him of his own journey from bitter teenager to purposeful adult. The coffee shop flyer had been a sign, he was sure of it. He'd recognized something in that dog's expression, not defeat, but patience, dignity. The same quiet strength he saw in his young patient's eyes when they pushed through one more exercise, one more step, one more try. The shelter's description had been brief. Max, 4 years old, recovered from accident, special needs adoption, special needs. The euphemism almost made James smile. He knew all about special needs and the way people's eyes slid away when they heard those words. His bank account balance glared at him from his phone screen, $342.17. The month's rent was due next week, and his car needed new brake pads. Common sense said he should walk away. He couldn't afford a dog, especially one that might need additional medical care or rehabilitation. His apartment complex charged extra for pets, and his schedule was already packed with patients and evening therapy sessions at the community center where he volunteered. But as he watched the other auction attendees file in, clutching their bidding cards and chattering about puppies and pedigrees, James couldn't shake the feeling that he was exactly where he needed to be. His fingers traced the outline of his grandfather's St. Christopher medal, tucked beneath his scrubs a reminder of the man who'd taught him that wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the courage to act when others turned away. The auctioneer was setting up his podium, shuffling through papers and testing the microphone. James approached the registration desk, his heart pounding but his step steady. The elderly volunteer smiled as she handed him bidding card number 23, not knowing she was witnessing the beginning of something extraordinary. First time at auction, she asked kindly, noting his youth and obvious nervousness. James nodded, his eyes straying to the corner kennel where Max sat watching the growing crowd. Sometimes, he said quietly, you just know when something's meant to be. He had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be, or how this morning's impulse would reshape not only his life but the lives of countless others. All he knew was that he'd seen something of himself in those steady amber eyes, and in his experience, the most profound healing often began with a moment of recognition, one wounded soul recognizing another and refusing to look away. The auction began promptly at 9. With a parade of perfect pets that made Max's corner seem even darker. A chocolate Labrador puppy started the bidding war, her tail wagging frantically as voices called out increasingly higher numbers. $300, $400, $500, and sold to the beaming family in the front row. Their young son bounced with excitement as the puppy covered his face with enthusiastic kisses. Lot number 45, purebred golden retriever, 2 years old, excellent breeding potential. The auctioneer's voice had found its rhythm now, the words flowing like music as bidding cards shot up across the room. $800 for a dog with papers and a pedigree. The successful buyer strutted to claim his prize, already talking about show competitions and breeding programs. James watched it all from his position near the back wall, bidding card number 23 clutched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, another reminder of all the reasons this was a bad idea. He ignored it. Lot number 46, mixed breed puppy, approximately 3 months old, a spotted bundle of energy, bounded into the display area, drawing collective audibles from the crowd. The bidding started at $100 and quickly climbed to $250. A young couple won, already arguing good-naturedly about what to name their new family member. Then came the moment James had been waiting for. The elderly volunteer approached Max's kennel, speaking to him softly as she attached the lead. The German shepherd rose with careful grace, compensating for his missing limb with practiced ease. Together, they made their way to the display area, their footsteps falling in an uneven rhythm that seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet room. Lot number 47, the auctioneer announced, his voice notably less enthusiastic. Male German shepherd, 4 years old. Some physical limitations, as you can see. Starting bid at $50. The silence that followed was broken only by the shuffle of feet and the rustle of papers as people pretended to study their auction catalogs. A few bidders had already started gathering their belongings, assuming the day's best offerings were behind them. Folks, this is a trained dog with an excellent temperament. The auctioneer tried again, his eyes scanning the crowd hopefully. Perfect for a quiet home. Do I hear $50? Max stood quietly in the display area, his amber eyes scanning the crowd with an intelligence that made many look away. He didn't strain at the leash or bark for attention like the others had. Instead, he maintained that same dignified pose, as if he understood exactly what was happening but refused to beg for what should be freely given. $40, the auctioneer's voice had taken on a pleading note. 30. The volunteer holding Max's leash blinked rapidly, her free hand stroking his fur. Everyone knew what happened to unadopted dogs, especially those with special needs. The shelter was already overcrowded and resources were limited. $100. James's voice cut through the uncomfortable silence like a thunderclap. He stood up, keeping his eyes fixed on Max to avoid seeing the stares and pitying looks from the crowd. His heart pounded so hard he could feel his grandfather's medal thumping against his chest. The auctioneer blinked in surprise. I have $100. Do I hear 150? Another silence fell, but this one felt different. People turned in their seats to look at the young man in scrubs who was willing to pay twice the starting price for a damaged dog. Max's ears had perked up, his head tilted slightly, as if trying to get a better look at his potential savior. 100 going once, the auctioneer's gavel hung in the air, going twice. In that suspended moment, Max's eyes met James's across the room. There was something in that gaze, recognition, perhaps, or understanding that made James's throat tight with emotion. This wasn't charity or impulse. This was destiny. Sold. To bidding card number 23. The gavel fell with a crack that seemed to break the spell over the room. Whispers erupted as James made his way forward, his steps as uneven as Max's as his right knee twinged with remembered pain. The volunteer had tears in her eyes as she handed him the leash, but James barely noticed. He was too busy kneeling carefully before his new companion, offering his hand for inspection. Max sniffed it once, then did something the shelter workers had never seen before he leaned forward and pressed his forehead against James's chest, right where the St. Christopher medal lay hidden beneath his scrubs. It wasn't just a meeting. It was a homecoming. The drive home felt surreal. James's Honda Civic rattled over potholes, while Max sat perfectly still in the back seat, his eyes fixed on the passing scenery. The shelter had provided a worn leash, some basic medical records, and a half-empty bag of kibble. What they couldn't provide was a manual for rehabilitating a three-legged German Shepherd or instructions for stretching an already thin budget even thinner. Home sweet home, James announced, pulling into the cramped parking lot of his apartment complex. The no pets allowed sign loomed large, but he'd already spoken with his landlord, agreeing to an extra $100 per month in pet rent money he'd have to earn by picking up weekend shifts at the hospital's rehabilitation center. Max's first steps into the apartment were cautious. He moved like someone mapping a minefield, testing each surface before committing his weight. James watched, his physical therapist's eye, noting the way Max compensated for his missing limb, the slight tension in his shoulders, the occasional tremor in his remaining front leg. "You're overworking your right side," Buddy James murmured, already planning exercises and stretches. "We'll need to strengthen your core and back muscles to help with balance." That first night set the pattern for weeks to come. Max wouldn't settle in the bed James had bought him, instead keeping a silent vigil from the corner of the living room. He ate mechanically when food was offered but showed no enthusiasm. The only time his ears perked up was when James did his own evening exercises, the German Shepherd watching intently as his new owner worked through the routine that kept his own old injury manageable. Financial reality hit hard that first month. The pet deposit had eaten most of James's savings, and Max's special needs added up quickly. Orthopedic padding for the floors to prevent slipping. Joint supplements recommended by the vet. A harness with a handle to help with balance on stairs. Each purchase meant another meal of ramen noodles for James, another delayed payment on his student loans, another awkward conversation with his mother about borrowing money. "I just worry about you, Mijo," she said during one of their weekly calls. "You can barely take care of yourself, and now." "I know what I'm doing," Mum James replied, watching Max attempt to navigate the small kitchen. "Some things are worth the struggle." The physical rehabilitation process was both familiar and frustratingly new. James drew on his professional experience, adapting exercises he used with his young patients. He set up obstacle courses in the living room using couch cushions and cardboard boxes, encouraging Max to develop better balance. They worked on weight shifts, core strength, and compensatory movements. But the real challenge wasn't physical, it was trust. Max cooperated with all the exercises but remained emotionally distant, as if expecting each day to be his last in the apartment. He flinched at sudden movements, cowered at loud voices in the hallway, and retreated to his corner whenever visitors arrived. The breakthrough came 6 weeks after the auction. James had just returned from a particularly grueling shift, his knee aching fiercely. As he sat on the floor doing his stretches, a wave of pain made him gasp. Before he could reach for his support strap, Max was there, offering his solid right side as a brace. Their eyes met, and for the first time Max's tail gave a tentative wag. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" James smiled, blinking back unexpected tears. Both a little broken, both refusing to quit. That night, Max slept beside James's bed instead of in his corner. The next morning, he greeted James with a soft woof, his first voluntary vocalization since coming home. Small victories, James thought, just like with his patients. Sometimes healing happened in barely perceptible increments. Progress wasn't linear. There were setbacks, days when Max's leg couldn't bear weight, nights when thunderstorms triggered anxiety attacks that left them both exhausted. James's credit card balance crept up, and dark circles grew under his eyes from working extra shifts. But there were also moments of pure joy. Max's first playful bow, his first enthusiastic greeting when James returned home, the morning he finally chased a ball in the dog park. The thing about rehabilitation, James explained to a curious neighbor who'd witnessed one of their training sessions, is that it's not just about healing the body. It's about rebuilding trust in yourself, in the world, in the possibility of a better tomorrow. He didn't add that he wasn't sure whether he was talking about Max or himself. Perhaps he was beginning to realize that was exactly the point. Spring melted into summer, and with the changing seasons came transformations that none could have predicted. Max's physical progress was remarkable. Months of targeted exercises had strengthened his core and remaining limbs, turning his once awkward gait into a smooth, confident stride. But it was the change in his spirit that truly amazed those who had known him from the auction house days. The breakthrough came unexpectedly one morning when James was running late for work. His knee was acting up, making him clumsy as he rushed to gather his things. As he stumbled, Max instantly appeared at his side, positioning himself perfectly to provide support. It wasn't just instinct, it was purposeful assistance, delivered with an understanding that seemed almost human. "You know what," James said, scratching behind Max's ears. "Maybe you should come to work with me today." The children's hospital had a therapy dog program, but the approval process was lengthy and bureaucratic. James decided to start small, bringing Max just to observe during his lunch break. The reaction was immediate and extraordinary. 7-year-old Sophie, who had been resistant to her physical therapy sessions since losing her leg to cancer, spotted Max from her wheelchair. "He's like me," she exclaimed, her face lighting up for the first time in weeks. Max approached her carefully, demonstrating an innate gentleness that brought tears to the eyes of watching nurses. The way he moved, compensating for his missing limb while maintaining his dignity, spoke louder than any words of encouragement. "If Max can do it, I can do it too," Sophie declared, gripping her parallel bars with newfound determination. Word spread quickly through the pediatric ward. Parents began requesting appointments during Max's visits, noticing how their children pushed harder and complained less when the 3-legged German Shepherd was there to demonstrate that different didn't mean incapable. James started documenting their sessions, initially just to track progress, but something remarkable happened when he shared a video on social media. "Meet Max, the 3-legged therapy dog in training, showing our brave patients that limitations are just invitations to adapt," read his first TikTok post. By morning, it had over 100,000 views. The comments poured in. "This made me cry. What a beautiful soul. As an amputee, this gives me so much hope. The way he helps that little girl. Animals are pure angels." James's supervisor, Dr. Reynolds, called him into her office after the video went viral. Instead of the reprimand he expected, she offered an opportunity. "We've been wanting to expand our animal-assisted therapy program. Would you be interested in developing a specialized track for patients with mobility issues?" The proposal meant additional training for both James and Max, more responsibilities, and longer hours. But it also meant official recognition of what they had already discovered, that their partnership had the power to heal, not just bodies, but spirits. Max took to his new role as if he'd been born for it. He seemed to instinctively know which patients needed quiet companionship and which needed playful encouragement. During therapy sessions, he would demonstrate modified movements, showing children how to adapt and overcome. His presence turned grueling physical therapy sessions into something children looked forward to. Their social media following grew exponentially. James began sharing daily updates, educational content about adaptive movement, and inspirational moments from their sessions. A video of Max teaching a young amputee how to navigate stairs caught the attention of several news outlets. Soon, they were featured in local newspapers and morning shows. The really amazing thing, James explained during one interview, is how Max adapts his approach for each patient. With Sophie, he's playful and encouraging. With Tommy, who's still processing trauma from his accident, Max just sits quietly nearby, offering silent support. He somehow knows exactly what each child needs. The transformation wasn't just in their public life. At home, Max had blossomed into a confident, joyful dog who greeted each day with enthusiasm. But his corner in the living room, once a refuge of fear, now held a bed he rarely used, preferring to sleep near James's room where he could be ready to help if needed. James, too, had changed. The financial struggles hadn't disappeared, student loans still needed paying, and Max's therapy certification wasn't cheap. But his work had gained new purpose. His patients' parents noticed the difference, how he spoke from personal experience about adaptation and resilience, always with Max as a living example of what was possible. One evening, as they walked through the park after a long day at the hospital, James watched Max play with a group of children who didn't even seem to notice his missing leg. A mother approached, her eyes wet with tears. "I saw your video last week," she said. "My daughter just lost her arm in an accident, and she's so angry, so scared. Seeing Max, seeing how happy and normal he is, it's the first thing that's given us hope." James smiled, watching Max demonstrate his perfect sit for young admirers. "Sometimes," he replied, "our greatest challenges become our greatest gifts to others." The pediatric rehabilitation wing was unusually quiet that Tuesday morning. In room 204, 8-year-old Marcus sat in his wheelchair, refusing to attempt the parallel bars. 3 weeks after losing his leg in a car accident, he hadn't spoken more than a few words, his once bright personality buried under layers of trauma and fear. "I know it feels impossible right now," James said softly, kneeling beside the wheelchair. "But I brought someone who might understand better than anyone else," he whistled softly, and Max padded into the room, his 3-legged gait steady and confident. Marcus's eyes widened. For the first time since his accident, he showed genuine interest in something. "He's like me," he whispered, echoing the words so many children had spoken upon meeting Max. "Want to hear his story?" James asked, and Marcus nodded. As James recounted Max's journey from the auction house to therapy dog, Max moved closer to Marcus, resting his head gently on the boy's lap. Without thinking, Marcus began stroking the dog's ears. "How does he walk so well?" Marcus asked, his voice stronger now. "Want him to show you?" James smiled, giving Max the signal they'd practiced. Max moved to the parallel bars, demonstrating how he balanced and compensated for his missing limb. Marcus watched, transfixed, as the German Shepherd navigated the course with grace and dignity. "He had to learn new ways to move," James explained. "Just like you will. It wasn't easy, but Max never gave up. Want to try it together?" To everyone's amazement, Marcus nodded. With Max walking beside him, matching his pace, Marcus took his first steps since the accident. The physical therapy team watched in awe as the boy who had refused to leave his wheelchair worked for 30 minutes straight, motivated by Max's encouraging presence and occasional gentle nudges. A nurse recorded the session on her phone, and with the family's permission, James shared it on their growing social media platform. The video exploded overnight, reaching millions of viewers worldwide. Local news stations picked up the story, featuring interviews with Marcus's parents and the hospital staff. "It's not just about physical therapy," Dr. Reynolds explained to reporters. "What Max and James are doing is showing these children that their differences don't define them. They're creating a new paradigm for rehabilitation." The broader medical community took notice. James received invitations to speak at conferences about animal-assisted therapy for trauma patients. Research teams expressed interest in studying their methods. the hospital's administration fast-tracked the expansion of their adaptive therapy program, with Max and James as the cornerstone. But the real breakthrough came from the community itself. A local business owner, moved by their story, offered to cover Max's remaining therapy certification costs. A veterinary clinic provided free specialized care for Max's unique needs. Parents of former patients organized fundraisers to help other families access the program. One morning, James arrived at work to find the hospital lobby filled with people. Former patients, their families, and community members had gathered for a surprise celebration. Among them was Sophie, now walking confidently with her prosthetic leg, and Marcus, standing tall with his new adaptive equipment. The hospital's CEO stepped forward with an announcement. Thanks to the incredible impact of James and Max's work, and the generous support of our community, we're establishing the Max Martinez Adaptive Therapy Center. This dedicated wing will serve children with mobility challenges, using the innovative methods James and Max have pioneered. Max, wearing his official therapy dog vest, sat proudly beside James as cameras flashed and applause filled the lobby. A local artist had painted a mural on the new center's wall, a striking portrait of Max leading a diverse group of children forward, all moving at their own pace but moving forward together. You know what the most amazing part is? James confided to a reporter later that day. Max was considered damaged goods at that auction. People saw his missing leg as a deficit, but it became his greatest gift, the very thing that allows him to connect with and inspire these kids. The reporter watched as Max gently encouraged a nervous new patient to attempt her first post-surgery steps. "And what about you?" she asked. "How has this journey changed you?" James touched his grandfather's medal, still hanging around his neck. "It's taught me that sometimes our wounds become our wisdom, that limitations can become innovations, and that healing often happens in the spaces between prescription and possibility, in those moments when someone who's been there shows you the way forward." That evening, as Max and James left the hospital, they passed the new center's sign. Below the official name, someone had added a quote, "Different isn't less. It's just a new way of being amazing." Max paused, looking up at James with knowing eyes. They had come so far from that auction house, but in many ways their journey was just beginning. The Max Martinez Adaptive Therapy Center became more than just a hospital wing. It evolved into a beacon of hope for families across the country. Letters and emails poured in daily, each sharing stories of lives transformed by the ripple effects of one man's decision to see potential where others saw limitation. "My daughter watched your videos every day during her recovery," wrote a mother from Ohio. Max showed her that being different didn't mean being less. She's now training her own service dog to help other kids. The program James developed, with Max as its heart, revolutionized pediatric rehabilitation. Traditional therapy sessions were reimagined to incorporate animal-assisted techniques, with specially trained dogs helping children navigate their new realities. The success rates spoke for themselves. Recovery times shortened, emotional trauma decreased, and patient engagement soared. Max's influence extended far beyond the hospital walls. Local shelters reported increased adoption rates for special needs animals, with families specifically asking for dogs with disabilities. The Max effect. They called it a shift in perspective that transformed perceived flaws into unique advantages. Recognition came in waves. The American Physical Therapy Association presented James with their Innovation in Practice Award. Max received the American Kennel Club's Award for Canine Excellence in Therapy. Their story was featured in medical journals, documentaries, and even inspired a children's book series about a three-legged therapy dog who helped children find their strength. But the most profound impact was visible in the quiet moments, in the way Marcus, now running on his prosthetic leg, stopped by weekly to volunteer with new patients, in how Sophie started a support group for young amputees, with Max as their unofficial mascot, in the determination of countless children who, inspired by Max, learned to see their differences as superpowers. James, too, had transformed. The uncertain young therapist who'd emptied his savings at an auction house was now a leading voice in adaptive therapy. His student loans were finally paid off, thanks to speaking engagements and program development contracts. But more importantly, he'd found his true calling not just in healing bodies, but in showing others how to transform their challenges into channels for helping others. As for Max, he moved through the hospital corridors like a silent guardian angel, somehow knowing exactly which patient needed him most each day. His once hesitant gait had become a badge of honor, showing children that dignity and purpose weren't dependent on having all the parts society deemed necessary. Together, they had created something extraordinary, a testament to the power of seeing beyond surface limitations to the limitless potential within. Their journey from an auction house rejection to pioneering a new approach to therapy proved that sometimes the most powerful healing comes from those who have known what it means to be broken and found their way to wholeness again. Today, 5 years after that fateful auction, the halls of the Martinez Adaptive Therapy Center buzz with activity. Children's laughter mingles with the gentle click of Max's paws on the polished floors as he makes his daily rounds. His muzzle may have grayed slightly, but his amber eyes still shine with the same determination that caught James's attention all those years ago. The center has expanded to include a training program for other therapy dogs with disabilities, turning what some might see as imperfections into unique qualifications for helping others heal. 3 other dogs, each with their own special needs, have joined the team, following in Max's pioneering pawprints. James now divides his time between treating patients and teaching other physical therapists how to incorporate animal-assisted therapy into their practice. The waiting list for their program grows longer each month, with families traveling from across the country to experience their innovative approach to healing. The future James muses, watching Max demonstrate a modified stair-climbing technique to a young patient learning to use her new prosthetic leg. We're working on opening satellite centers in other cities, but more importantly, we're spreading a message that our challenges don't define us, they refine us. Max's story has become legend in the rehabilitation community, shared with each new patient who arrives feeling broken or limited. It's a story that begins with rejection but transforms into one of purpose and possibility. A reminder that sometimes the very things that make us different are the things that make us extraordinary. You know. James reflects, scratching behind Max's ears as they watch the sunset from their favorite bench in the hospital garden. People often ask me if I saved Max that day at the auction. But the truth is, we saved each other. And together, we've learned that our greatest limitations often become our greatest gifts to others. Max wags his tail in agreement, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. After all, their journey has proven that it's not about how many legs you have, it's about how much heart you put into each step forward.